Thanks so much for joining me today. It's been obviously crazy for everybody. For like since gosh, when the last time was that I made one of these videos? What was it, like February or maybe even earlier than that? I don't know. It's been a while since I've been online, and there's obviously been a lot that's been going on, and I'm sure some of you guys are kind of curious what I have to say about some of that. So today we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and the current controversy over sending kids back to school. All right, so it's been a while since I've done some of this, so sorry if the mechanics of switching from intro screen to the news articles is a little bit jarred right now. I'll get a little bit better, obviously, as I get back into the habit of doing this. So I kind of want to talk today about COVID-19, and obviously it's there's a lot of pressure on society right now. There's a lot of in America, especially, there's a lot of different things that are going on. Lots of different states handling this in a very different way, and typically it's kind of funny because the states that are being the most draconian about their social distancing rules and the masks, and the states that have been really on this from early on seem to also be the ones that are most impacted. And it could be because they were the highest impact, they went to more draconian measures, and maybe those states that were quicker to enact those policies has had less of a problem. There's a lot of just kind of mixed things going on there. And one of the things that I think happens regularly is this implication, or this, I don't know if it's this belief of somehow that the onset of the virus is just all at once besetting the nation. And that's really not the case. It gets transmitted from community to community. So you're going to have these ebbs and flows across state lines. You're going to have certain states that are impacted harder early on, and then as the virus moves through the country, other states are going to start picking up more and more cases. It's the way that these viruses occur. You don't just suddenly have an equal distribution of cases across the board amongst all the states. You have transmission rates, and you have people in commerce happening from state to state and from border to border. So this fluctuation that we see now in Texas and Florida and Arizona and these southern states, in a way, it can't necessarily be predicted that it's going to happen, but it's not really a surprise. If you understand that, viruses, they transmit and they ebb and flow. For crying out loud, they started out in China. We didn't instantly, as soon as there was a case in China, all of a sudden there was a global pandemic. It took a while for the virus to cross the country boundaries and move into other countries and stuff like that. So having this outbreak happen in Texas and this outbreak happen in Arizona and Florida, these are just kind of delayed from when the virus initially hit our borders in states like New York and New Jersey and Washington, and even to a certain extent California had an early outbreak, but it died down. It didn't go away, but the concerns didn't really balloon up in California initially like they did in like New Jersey and New York. So, and I have some what I think are interesting theories about all of that, about why the virus impacts certain people a little bit more than others. But what I kind of want to get onto today is there's the current debate going on about whether or not we should be sending kids back to school. And I just kind of wanted to pick up just a starting point, some sort of article talking about coronavirus. And this one came from Reuters, and again, Reuters is somewhat middle of the road, so I'm okay with kind of using them as a starting point. But one of the big things that happened is the United States recorded more than 1,000 deaths from the COVID-19 for the fourth straight day. So 4 straight days. And if you look at, Google actually has a pretty good charting system of all of this. and they say 1,000 new cases or 1,000 new deaths, right, from COVID-19. So if we switch out this, I'm in the United States, all regions, all time, and I switch to the deaths, you'll see 1,000. And this is what kind of bothers me about news media. Okay, we were breaking 1,000 all the way back in April. This is not like hitting the 1,000 death mark in this time of year. Although it is tragic, it is also not anything compared to what we were seeing in April and May, when the U.S. was in virtual lockdown, mind you. Right, we were back in as early as March. Several states were in total lockdown. Businesses closed up, mandatory masking, social distancing protocols. And even despite having all of those precautions in place, we still saw spikes almost up to 3,000 people, right? In one day, 2,701 people died. Now, assuming that these statistics are accurate, which is a whole other thing to deal with too, right? Is how many of these deaths are actually COVID related versus somebody just had COVID and died from something else, right? There have been reports of, in Florida, there was an infamous report where a guy got in a bicycle accident and died from his injuries, but it was marked as a COVID case. Like, no, he didn't die from COVID. He just happened to have COVID when he got in the bicycle accident. Okay. Now, could he have been coughing, or could he have been tired, or could he have been running a fever and that was making him delirious? Like, those type of decisions, we don't really know for sure. If that would be the case, then it would have been a contributing factor to his cause of death. And that's where these lines of when somebody has died of a COVID-19 case versus when is it just simply that they have it really start to get blurry, and it kind of makes it difficult. And states have been doing all sorts of funky things with the data that make some of this data is just simply unreliable. But on the overall, I think that we still have to acknowledge the trends that we see in the data, right? We don't necessarily have to take into account, or we have to just believe that there's a margin of error, right? There's just a margin of error built into these statistics. What that margin of error is, I don't know. And I don't know that anybody truly even knows. And even the people who say, hey, there's a margin of error, are getting kind of, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Like, you're just denying that it's even happening. And that's malarkey, right? It's just a simple acknowledgement that statistics are statistics, and they can have underlying concerns that may be impacting the validity of some of the results, right? That's all it is. And that's not unheard of. That's what science is all about, is you have multiple sources confirming. You have to run experiments that can be duplicated in multiple environments before you can say that an experiment is truly factual or provides true evidence. So that's why studies and things like that, they have to be proven through multiple studies. You can't just have one and then therefore you create social systems based around that one study. And that's a whole other topic that could go into college stuff, like what they teach in college campuses and things like that becomes bubbles. Anyway, whole other topic for another day. Let's get back into this. So the COVID-19 deaths, we see that there was 1,150 as of July 24th, which was yesterday. Excuse me. No, I don't believe that's a COVID cough. So anyway, those are the deaths. And if you look at the new cases, you'll see, whoo, boy, it's pretty large. Now, there is also an expected delay of between 2 to 4 weeks between the cases and the death rate. So, because it takes a while from when somebody contracts it and is tested positive to when they actually die, there's usually a lag time of between 2 to 4 weeks on average. So, really what you have to do is, if you look at the death rate or the deaths that we have for this week, this really truly reflects probably about 2 or more weeks ago in terms of actual cases. So if we go and we look at the new cases, we see, so 2 weeks ago would have been July 10th. And if you start looking at around July 10th, that's where you see that spike right there in the number of cases. So now you can start doing a little bit of math. So 66,786. And we could just pull up the calculator here. So 66,786, right? Is that what it was? 86. Now that was the largest spike that we saw for exactly 2 weeks ago. Again, it's somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. So it could be, we could actually be seeing from earlier when we had a few fewer cases. Okay. But I'm going to take this high spike within that span, and I'm going to say that's the highest number of cases that we saw. And then if you take a look at the number of deaths, which was this 1,150. So if you then, so if we, actually I did this in the wrong way, didn't I? So I need to do 1,150 and then divided by new cases. Then we have, and that was 66,786. So that gives us a 1.7% death rate, about. So about a 98.3 survival rate. 98.3 survival rate. Okay, and again, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of fluctuation, and this is just a roundabout figure. I've seen studies that go. The other thing that needs to be understood is that this is not expected to actually be the actual number of people who are infected. There's a large portion of the scientific community that says that you should really think of like 10 times, 8 to 10 times this number is actually the real number of cases that are out there. It's just that these are people who have it and are not coming in to get tested, or they have it and they don't know it because they're asymptomatic, that sort of thing. So you could take this number, 66,786, multiply that by 8. So we could actually multiply this by, what would we need to do? Divide that by 8? I don't know. I'm not that great at math anymore. But you can see that this number, if you were to just say 10 times more, that would make it a 0.17%. So that you're talking about 99.83% of people survive contracting it, right? That's if we just do some simple mathematics about it, right? Then it would be 99.83% or 828%, right? So there's a large, by large, overwhelming majority of people who contract this virus are getting over it. There is a certain section of people who are not. And if we look at the statistics, and I don't have those here, but it's almost exclusively people that are age 45 and older. And that kind of ties back into what I was wanting to talk about today, is the percentage of people, and maybe we can just do a quick little search for that, right? So if we just do a quick little COVID deaths by age bracket, age group. We'll do that. So let's see. Do we have a good chart of this somewhere? World-O-meters. Look at this. 0 to 17 years old, number of deaths 9, and even those might be not really totally sure. With underlying conditions, 6. So that means that the child who was 17 years old or younger had some sort of underlying health condition, maybe an autoimmune deficiency, or some sort of health issue that impacted them. Without underlying conditions, three children, which is tragic. Again, 3 children dying of this virus. And this, again, assuming that any of this information is accurate. And this is going all the way back to May 13th. So obviously there's probably some changes in these numbers since then. But I just kind of wanted to, oh, here's April. Yeah, so, I mean, age of coronavirus deaths. Here's a look at this breakdown of in terms of how many, and I don't even know how accurate this is. 0 to 9 years old, there are no fatalities. 10 to 19 years old, a 0.2%. That's of the children who we know get it and have died from it is 0.2%, which is statistically less than the flu. That is less than the flu. Of children who get the flu and then die from the flu. So the statistical data shows that your child is more likely to die of the flu than of this COVID-19 outbreak. Now, that is not the only concern. I fully acknowledge that is not the only concern with sending children back to school, because part of what we need to concern ourselves with is the transmission from child to the parents, and then from the parents to the grandparents, or from the children to grandparents, etc. So how do you prevent the most vulnerable from getting this? So we have a surge in infections in Arizona, California, Florida, Texas, and California. They mentioned California twice because I guess that just makes it look scarier. I don't know. Which, again, going back to Handy, you should be looking at data here. So if we change this to Texas, actually we can't do it that way. We have to go through, hold on here. Daily cases, Colorado. Let's do Texas. And then it'll give me the ability to switch. There we go. So we can see that there's been a leveling off in Texas. Again, 2-week time lapse you have to think about. So what we see in terms of deaths will probably be from around July 10th, right? So that's about where the spike was of where we're going to start to see deaths. So I anticipate that sometime in the next, in about a week, we're going to see probably the highest spike in deaths in Texas, most likely, at least if this trend continues to follow. And if we look at, instead of new cases, we switch over to deaths, you can see Texas is definitely dealing with some spikes, okay? If we switch over to, they mentioned Arizona. If we look at the deaths in Arizona, we see some earlier spikes. We're probably starting to level off a little bit here for the last, week or so. If we go and take a look at Florida, which is another one that they like to point out, we're still kind of at the high point here in terms of deaths. If we look at the new cases, we see it's kind of leveling off, although this could be re-spiking again for a couple of days, who knows. But it definitely, there has been an outbreak in the southern states, and there's a good argument to be had as to why this is happening. Notice that all of these states are in the southern states, right? These big giant spikes and swaths we see are in southern states. States like Texas and Florida and Arizona and California. And I think that there's a good argument to be made that is primarily because people are staying mostly indoors, right? These are the states that are typically more outdoorsy during the winter months and indoors during the summer months because it's too hot. So typically the transmissions of viruses happen more frequently in the summer times in these southern states because that's the time that everybody's staying indoors. But also there's something to be said about the heat possibly killing the virus, so it doesn't impact these states as much as it does in the northern states when they do receive the spikes, right? So Texas, Florida, Arizona, even though they have a higher percentage of they have a higher population in Texas than they do in New York, but because it's warm out, and we know from several studies that the coronavirus does not do well in really hot temperatures, right? When it's 80 degrees and sunny, it's going to destroy the virus. So, actually being outdoors is one of the best ways to avoid getting the virus, which, crazy, right? Instead, all these states are locking down and saying you need to stay indoors when really the best place to be is outdoors away from everybody. That's the best way to avoid the contraction of the virus. And I have some thoughts on whether or not we should even be trying to avoid the virus contraction, because I think that we need to develop herd immunity. But that's, again, a whole other topic, another part of this. Okay, going back to, we've already started to see some plateauing in these critically 4 states that have, really suffered under the last 4 weeks. So Texas, California, Arizona, and Florida, those major metros and throughout their countries. Deborah Bricks told an NBC News in an interview. Whoever, that's a doctor, I guess. Brooks's comments came as federal health and education officials stressed the need for children to return to in-class instruction. The American public and its leaders have been sharply divided over whether students should return to school for the fall term during the pandemic. Birx said children under the age of 18 are typically less sick than older adults from the sometimes deadly illness, but called it an open question how readily those under 10 can spread the virus. So, this is kind of going back to, look, your kids, they're probably going to get it if they go back to school. They're probably going to get it. All right? That's not really what the argument is about, is whether or not the kids are going to get it. And these fools that are going out there on the news saying, well, Donald Trump doesn't care about your kids dying, or some foolish notion like that's obviously just hyperbolic political speech that just has no basis in fact, right? It's just about trying to scare you into not voting for him in November, which, okay, whatever, tactics and politics are going to happen like that all the time. But the real question is, what is this going to do in terms of the spread to adults? That, I think, is the more concerning thing, and why I'm not, honestly, I'm kind of on the fence about this. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think the kids should be going back to school, and there's a lot of reasons why I think they do need to go back to school. So I want to go into just one little snippet here, and this may be taking things out of context, I guess. I'm fully admitting that I'm probably taking this little snippet out of context from this, because most of this article is kind of saying, hey, kids kind of contribute to the spread, and they can still catch the virus, and it's likely that they are contagious for some time, even if they feel fine. Now, here's the thing. This, to me, even though this is WebMD, I don't necessarily believe that the science backs this up. The idea that a contagious person is transmitting the virus is, look, there's a simple way to really understand how the virus can be transmitted. Okay, it's through saliva, right? It's in your breath, it's in your whatever. But the thing is, when you're just breathing and talking, like I'm talking really loud right now, I'm projecting, so I have these molecules, I have these, saliva that's coming out from the back of my throat that's being projected. And of course, we've seen people who talk really loud and they spit out their mouths and stuff like that. Like that's going to possibly, if that gets onto you, okay. But here's the funny thing, like people are talking about the aerosolized version of this virus. That is entirely possible, but when you're talking and when you're doing these vocal things and you're projecting, the spit that comes out of your mouth when you are talking is going to be in much larger pieces, right? Just when you're talking, you're not aerosolizing things out into the open like that. You can spit, and there is a little bit of that right immediately in front. Like if you've ever had somebody with bad breath, right? You have to get pretty close to that person to really smell their bad breath when they're talking or breathing, right? So there is some aerosolizing that can happen there from what's on the back of your throat when you're talking and projecting. And I think that's why a lot of people are saying you need to be wearing a mask, because when you're talking, all that aerosolizing is just going out in there. But here's the funny thing. The masks that you're typically wearing are not going to catch those things. Just today, my wife and I, we went in to go order some food from a sub sandwich place, and we can do that in the state of Oregon. As of right now, you can still go in. You can't dine in, but you can still go in to order and carry out. And it hit me immediately. I've got my mask on. I've got the full because it's mandatory here in Oregon. Trust me, if I didn't have to, I wouldn't be wearing one. But here in Oregon, it's mandatory. Well, I don't know that I wouldn't. There are some cases where I probably still would. But so I've got my mask on. I go into this bakery and I can smell the bread that they're baking. Now, how is that possible? My mask is supposed to be preventing that, right? My mask is supposed to be preventing any sort of aerosols getting into my system. Clearly, that's not what the mask is doing. So the mask is not stopping these aerosoled things from coming in. So how could it be said that my aerosols going out are being prevented? And not only that, but if I'm wearing my glasses and I have my mask on, my glasses fog up. So clearly the aerosol that, like, yes, the mask might be catching some of the things, but it's not catching all of it. And honestly, I don't know that it's catching much at all. So, okay, the masks aren't stopping particles from getting in. They're not stopping particles from getting out unless they are of a particular size. And the only size that could possibly go through those masks would be dropping immediately to the floor anyway, right? So it's not like me talking if I'm talking really loud and I'm kind of getting saliva coming out of my mouth. This is a really gross topic probably, but if a lot of saliva is coming out of my mouth and it's getting into the air, it's almost dropping immediately, right? The stuff that could possibly do that. Otherwise, the part that is aerosolized that could hang around in the air for a particular while is stuff that is not really being projected out there. It's not going out. And I would contend is probably not really, it's probably not going to have a very good chance of infecting anybody else. It just doesn't make any sense that it would, because that person would have to like swallow a lot of it, right? And so they're putting masks on in order to try to prevent that. But honestly, as we just said, if I am able to say it out of my mask, how is their mask going to prevent them from getting it, right? If I can speak it and it goes out into the air, how is their mask, which theoretically is escaping my mask, how is the air escaping my mask going to be prevented from their mask and them inhaling it? It's not actually doing any of that. Now, there are some masks that do that, like the N95s, right? The N95s are built so that the incoming air is filtered, but then they have a valve on it where when you exhale, your breath goes out. So if I am infected and I'm wearing an N95, I'm not doing anything for the public by wearing an N95 mask. If I have this and I'm wearing an N95, if I have been diagnosed with coronavirus and I am breathing through an N95 mask, because I'm exhaling my air through a valve, it is still going out and it's not being stopped by the mask. Okay, that's a big problem. So people need to understand what's going on with these masks. Are these fabric type masks actually solving anything? There's little to no evidence to support that they are. And in fact, the states that had the heaviest restrictions on who needs to wear masks were places like New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and all these states that were the deepest, most impacted by the virus. They had the worst cases, the worst part of the outbreak. So I don't see any evidence so far that actually says that these masks help to prevent the spread of the virus at all, other than what people theorize in terms of the exhaling and the inhaling of saliva, essentially, from the back of your throat when you're talking. And again, the particles that could be aerosolized by me doing that are escaping the mask anyway. So what is the point? I don't understand the point. Now, how then could this idea that asymptomatic people are transmitting the virus happen? Because this is another thing that's a kind of one of those things. And it really is the whole basis of why states are saying you need to be wearing a mask. It's almost the entire reason why masks are being made mandatory is because there's this belief out there that asymptomatic people are spreading the virus. And there's been little to no evidence that I would say there has been no evidence that specifically the aerosolized version of talking has been the transmission of the virus. And if you think about this, this makes total sense. What can transmit the virus is the same way any virus is transmitted, the same way the flu is transmitted, or a cold is transmitted. That is besides just, what you're breathing out. It's if I take my finger and I lick it and I stick it on a desk, and then you come down and you put your hand on that same desk and then you touch your face, right? That has nothing to do with whether I'm wearing a mask or not. Is not going to prevent that transmission. Right? It's because I am actually taking saliva. I'm actually getting the virus on some part of my hands or some part of my body, or maybe even clothing, and then transferring it to some other thing, some other inanimate object that you then go and touch, or you then go and interact with. And that is how you then contract it. And it has nothing to do with breathing or masks or anything like that. So you can have asymptomatic people that are transmitting the virus, but not through talking, not through their breath. They're doing it because they are touching themselves. They're getting some form of the virus onto their hands and then touching things. And then other people go and touch those things, and then they, touch their face and eat food or whatever. So really the biggest danger here are things like, let's just say, for example, if you are using a service that I use all the time, like DoorDash or Grubhub or Uber Eats or any of those type of, heck, we use Instacart to get our groceries. So you think about this, people who are asymptomatic, okay, they've got COVID, but they're asymptomatic, they're not coughing, they're not sneezing, they're not doing any of those things. But they're infected and they're touching the goods that are then coming from the store. Then the person that is transferring it, the DoorDash, the Uber Eats, the Instacarts, those shoppers are then touching the infected things, the infected food products, and then handing them over to me and dropping them off on my door, even if it's not an in-contact thing, right? If they're just dropping it off on the door, then still the virus exists on those goods. And so I take those into my house and I start putting them away. And even if I basically would have to take and sanitize every single can, every single milk jug, every single box, everything that I receive back from the store, I would have to sanitize everything and sanitize my hands in order to eliminate the virus from being transmitted to me from somebody who is asymptomatic. And again, this has absolutely nothing to do with masks. Nothing. This has to do with an asymptomatic person getting some sort of saliva on their hands and then putting it on something, right? Maybe they picked it up from, maybe they went to the restroom or something and they touched a doorknob that somebody else previously touched, and then their hands now have it and then they transfer it. And the whole idea that gloves are going to protect you, that's not going to be the case either, because the virus is going to sit on the gloves, and then the gloves transmit it over to the milk jugs and whatnot. So look, there's really very little in terms of what you can do to prevent the asymptomatic transmission of these things, other than making sure that you're consistently washing your hands and you are sanitizing everything that enters your home and that you touch, right? But those things are the very things that you would be doing for any virus, for any epidemic. Right? It has nothing to do with COVID. That's just, if there's a flu out there, that's what you do. If you are worried about your health in what you are receiving, regardless of what the virus is, you would still do those exact same measures. And again, the masks are not stopping that. The masks are not doing anything to actually prevent that. Nor are the gloves. The gloves aren't doing anything to prevent that either. Unless you are literally, after every single thing that you touch, take off your glove, throw it out, and grab a new one. No one's doing that, right? Nobody's doing that. So all of these preventative measures that people are taking in order to stop this, there are some that are effective, but by and large, the majority of things that people are doing are not effective at all. Okay? The Lysoling of things and the disinfecting of things, the sanitization of things, washing your hands, those are just basic, simple things that you can do if you are really, really concerned about getting the virus. So do them, okay? I'm not telling you not to do those things. You should do them. If you are concerned about your health, you are immune compromised, you should be doing those things. You probably already are. if you have an immunodeficiency, some sort of health concern, you're probably already doing all of those things because you're worried about all the normal germs that exist in our day-to-day life. So, right, so the people that are most concerned should be doing all of those things anyway. Again, I don't know that the cloth masks, especially the cloth masks, they're not really doing any good. I don't think that they're doing any good. What is probably doing some good, though, is some of the social distancing things. Okay, that is probably helping it. So I am not for, I do not believe that the governments should be mandating people stay home. I don't think they should be shutting down restaurants. I don't even think that they should be telling restaurants that they have to maintain social distancing protocols. I don't think that the state should be doing that. What they should be doing is recommending, right? Here is what the science says. Here are the preventative measures that we would like you to follow. And the job of the state is to ensure that not that the behavior of the people has changed, but that the services that the state provides, such as support for the hospitals and the frequency of testing, the ability to pass tests out, or the money spent in order to do better research on the testing processes and distribute those tests. That I can see. I can see an argument for why they need to be involved in that particular part of the process, okay? Because it's an easier way to go. What I have a very big problem with is when states and governors especially, and boy, the one from Indiana just really ticked me off when I just read the article today. But the governors and the state legislatures, etc., should not be mandating the behavior of the people. That is where I think that we really cross a line about what it is to be an American. Americans are, we really kind of founded this, we were kind of founded upon the idea of individual responsibility. And when the government goes in and dictates what your behavior is, we fit the very definition of a nanny state. Right? When the government has to tell you how to go about living your life and what you can and cannot do, that is where your rights as a citizen of the United States are being infringed. That's just the bottom line. But that doesn't mean that the government doesn't have any sort of duty during a crisis. It doesn't mean that they don't have some part to play in this. Again, they should be advising. Here are based upon the science of what has been truly conducted. Here are the statistics. Here's the science. Here's what our recommendations are. Not brute force, you must comply, but here's what we suggest. That is it's a very simple solution and allows the freedom of the individual to make their own choices, and for the commerce, the individual businesses, to say, these are the guidelines that the state has set forward and we are deciding to follow them. That is perfectly acceptable. If the companies, the individual businesses decide that they want to follow those things, to follow those guidelines, they certainly can. But to enforce it with the brute force of law, that is where I have a serious problem. You should not be mandating it. You should, especially when it's when a governor, like the one in Indiana, has now said it's going to be a misdemeanor and you could be fined for, I forget what the fine is. It's like $600 or something like that. You could be fined if you are not abiding by the social distancing guidelines and wearing masks, right? And this was a sole discretion of the governor doing it as an executive order. And I don't know exactly when this happened where executive orders were the force of law. I don't know when that occurred. I don't remember exactly when that law was passed that allowed executive orders by governors and by presidents to be the force of law that is a new law on the books that impacts the ability of citizens to do commerce and to have interactions with their fellow citizens. I don't know when that happened because it never happened in my life. If it happened in my lifetime, I never heard about it. I never saw it. I never heard about the law. I never saw a vote. I never saw any of that. So I don't know when this happened that these executive orders suddenly became the force of law. And that means that is the definition of a dictatorship, right? When one person can create laws and enforce them, that is no longer a republic. That is no longer a democracy. That is a dictatorship. And that is what I'm seeing a lot of governors doing today. This is why you have a lot of people on this side of the aisle that are upset about this. It has nothing to do with, oh, COVID-19 is a hoax. Oh, masks are a hoax. Or, we shouldn't be, you're going to kill grandma if you, well, actually that's the opposite side. But, it's not the conspiracy that, there are obviously some conspiracy theorists out there. COVID is from 5G. I think that's really just a meme that the left created in order to slander the right or the opposition, to make something so silly and outlandish that they came up with a ridiculous conspiracy theory and then bantered it around as if it was what the conservative side was saying. That's not the case, okay? What's really going on is I think the majority of people realize that this is way overblown, but they don't feel that they have any other choice other than to follow the rules that the government is dictating, and I do mean dictating, to them to do, okay? That's what I think is going on, and that's why I think you have a large backlash against this that has been growing over time, especially as more people kind of see the crap that's out there. At the same time, you have the news media and even some, well-meaning scientific areas, such as WebMD, for example, that are putting out this information that is more alarming. It's not necessarily because it's factually based or scientifically based, but because it's easy to tap into fear and to make that sensationalized and gain more viewership and readership. That's the bottom line of what's going on with the media. Okay, so they can still catch the virus, and it's likely that they're contagious for some time, even if they feel fine. Yes, that's both true and not true. It's true that they can be contagious, again, through the methods that I was talking about, right? If the kids are getting, which kids do, right? They get their hands, they lick their hands, they're eating candy, and they get their hands in their mouths, and then they go over and they touch Susie, and Susie's now got it, and then Susie goes home and gives it to her parents, right? But that has nothing to do with aerosolized, that has nothing to do with masks, that has nothing to do with any of that. That has to do with just kids being kids, getting their hands in their mouths and stuff like that. So the kids might be transmitting it, but they're not dying from it, right? They're getting it, but they're not dying from it. And in my opinion, that's actually a good thing. That's actually a good thing that kids with immune systems are contracting it and getting over it, because that helps with herd immunity. The problem is that those kids are then going to home, and then the parents are then contracting it from their kids, and the parents may not necessarily be the healthiest of individuals. And that's where, again, personal responsibility comes into play. If you are a parent that is concerned about your kids transmitting it to you, then you unfortunately need to make some hard choices about how you are going to handle that. If I was a parent of a child, I think of this like smallpox, or not smallpox, I'm sorry, chicken pox, right? For those of you who have been, who grew up and you had to deal with chicken pox, your parents most likely told you at some point to go play with some other kid who had chickenpox. Why? So that you would grow an immunity to it. And then once you were immune to it, you weren't going to transmit it to the rest of the family. So in my opinion, what you really need is you want the kids to get this as soon and as fast as possible so that they can all get over it, and then all our families can go back to normal. And all the kids that are going through school can go back to school without having to worry about the transmission of the disease, because everybody will have gotten it. You have herd immunity. All the parents aren't going to get it now from the kids that have developed the herd immunity or have developed the immunity, and we insulate. So there's an initial shock of kids that get it and transmit it. They're not dying from it, but you do need to take precautions that when they get it, you kind of isolate them from the individuals who have compromised immune systems or have some sort of underlying condition that puts them at risk. And so this would be an unfortunate couple of weeks that the kids are having to deal with it and not being able to be with one or more of their parents. Maybe they go, hang out with some aunts or uncles that have already gotten it. Or, I mean, it's some hard choices. It definitely is. I'm not saying that it would be easy. But at the same time, we can't not transmit it because, unfortunately, this virus is not going to go away, right? The cold hasn't gone away. The flu hasn't gone away. There are viruses that continue to this day to continue to spread. They don't just go away. They keep circulating. And the only way you can limit their impact is to develop an immuno response to it. That's the only way to truly work against the virus. That's why we have the flu vaccine, is because what you're essentially doing is you are fast tracking your immune system to develop a response to the actual thing. And so when your body gets introduced to the actual flu, it just simply already has the antibodies that are necessary in order to fight it off quickly. That's all that the flu virus really does. So even this vaccine for the coronavirus is not going to be a silver bullet, but it will help with the immuno response of the people to the coronavirus. But it's still going to continue to go around, and all you can do is just really kind of flatten the curve, which was what we were all trying to do initially. Nobody in the beginning was saying we're going to prevent the spread entirely of this virus. No one was saying that. It was, we need to flatten the curve. We need to prevent an overloading of our healthcare system. That was the original goal of all of these measures. And somehow, somewhere along the way, and a bunch of us on the conservative side were saying, look out, because the media and the left are going to take this and they're going to say, you're going to kill grandma, right? They're going to try to make it so that they can continue putting these draconian, these draconian laws in place to force your behavior, and they're going to threaten you with killing grandma or killing the vulnerable, right? That's what they're going to do, because that's what they always do, right? It's always the most vulnerable that we need to worry about. And they're going to come up with every type of dictatorial thing that they can do in order to make sure that that happens. All right. So how often do asymptomatic people spread the coronavirus? It's unclear. That's right. It's unclear. How often do asymptomatic people spread the coronavirus? Again, and this is somewhat backed by the data, my suspicion is that it's contracted in pretty much the exact same way any other virus is done. The aerosolized version of the virus only gets spread when you are showing symptoms, like you're coughing and you're sneezing, right? Because then when you're coughing and you're sneezing, you are projecting out the virus out into the world. Okay, so uncovered coughs, uncovered sneezes, those are projecting it out into the world. So that would mean you are symptomatic. Okay, that would be when you need to have a mask to ensure that you are not spreading through coughing and sneezing. But when you are asymptomatic, you're not coughing and sneezing. So the only way that you could possibly transmit the virus, if you're asymptomatic but have it, the only way you could actually transmit it is not through coughing and sneezing, but by touching things, getting your mouth or your eyes, if you're cleaning out your eyes or whatnot, and you get something on there, or whatever other methods of bodily fluids that you're using. Ugh, I hate saying that term, but whatever to get onto your hands or get onto your clothes, and then you transfer that over to some other object that somebody else comes in contact with. And then because they come in contact with it and they didn't wash their hands or they didn't sanitize, then they go and touch their face, which is typically when you're wearing a mask, you're touching your face most likely. So, you're causing somebody the asymptomatic person, if they are not keeping themselves, their hands clean, and they touch some sort of surface, then someone else comes and touches that same surface. They now have the virus on their person, and if they get it into their system some way, they're going to contract the virus. Again, masks are a big reason why people are touching their faces nowadays, which is, we know, is a way that people can contract the virus, is because they are touching their faces. So this whole idea that masks are preventing anything, there's no real evidence. There's no clear evidence that even works. The CDC's guidelines initially said that don't do it because masks have a higher possibility of you actually contracting the virus or a virus in general from inappropriate use of masks. Nurses, for example, have to go through an entire course on just how to put a mask on and the use of a mask, right? Like you have to actually, as you're going through medical school or nursing school, you have to learn about masks, how to even put one on. So how are you going to inform the public about proper mask wearing? And do you really believe that enough people are going to be wearing masks appropriately? And as we said, asymptomatic people, there's no evidence that asymptomatic people are transmitting the disease through aerosol. They might be doing it through touching their mouth and blah, 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 right? And then touching some other surface and someone else contracting it that way, not washing your hands, right? That's the way that people are contracting the virus when they're asymptomatic. It makes total perfect sense when you think about it. But the whole wearing a mask thing is actually, there's more evidence to support that's a better way to contract the virus than to prevent it. It's just out there. We've known this forever. That's why the CDC has, there's a very famous picture going around right now on the side of a box of masks that says that, this is not to prevent diseases. Right? This is not to prevent the transmission of a virus, which seems a little counterintuitive, but that's what they actually say, because when you actually look at the science of these things, that's the truth of it. Okay, so how often do asymptomatic people spread the coronavirus? It's unclear. Yeah, that's right. It still appears to be rare that asymptomatic individuals actually transmit the virus onward. Maria Van Kerkhove, the WHO's technical lead for the COVID-19 response, said, and I have my qualms with the WHO, but it is what it is. Luis Garza says, all we should change the way we drink beverages. Instead of drinking Coca-Cola, we should drink lemonade, adding honey and onion with manzanilla tea. Yeah, or manzanilla tea. Yeah, that's a good point, because the acidity within the beverage can help to destroy the virus, right? Vitamin C is very well known to help kind of combat some of the cold symptoms and actually, in some cases, destroy the cold virus. That's same thing, right? The coronavirus is a form of the cold virus. So yeah, I mean, vitamin C, all the same things that you would typically do in order to prevent a cold or to assist with a cold. That's pretty much what you should be doing right now. Nothing special. Do you wear masks because people are getting colds? Maybe if you have a compromised immune system, that might be something you're doing, but you're probably wearing a very specialized mask. You're not going around wearing cloth masks that are very porous and don't prevent viruses. And not only that, but if you are somebody with a compromised immune system and you have to habitually wear masks, you probably know the appropriate way in order to put one on and to make sure that you don't get yourself infected. But by and large, the people who are just now starting to wear a mask have no idea how to properly wear one or how to properly put one on. Heck, I don't even think I do. I haven't informed myself on how to do it because honestly, I don't even care. Personally, I just don't care. If I had my druthers, I wouldn't be wearing a mask. I would just be going out walking around normally, because my opinion is if I get it, my immune system, and I've talked to my doctor about this, my immune system is not compromised. I actually, in a way, want to get it so that I can get over it and my immune system can go on. And then anytime that I come in contact with somebody else who has it, I don't have to worry about it. And that's the case, again, for 99.97%, or we don't even really know exactly, but well over the overwhelming majority, like not even a small sliver, like it's not like 51 to 50%. We're talking 99 point something percent of the people who contract the virus get over it and now have some sort of immunity to it. For whatever period of time that is, we don't necessarily know, but at least their immune system has developed some sort of response to it. And if they get impacted by it again at some other point in the future, like next year, they might, once coronavirus makes its way around the globe again next year, because it will happen, right? We know that it will happen. Viruses don't just go away. They come back, they circulate, they keep going around. So I need my immune system to develop some sort of immunoresponse to this. So in my opinion, If you are a healthy individual, you need to be getting this. You need to get it. Because if you don't, the longer it takes for you to develop that immune response, the more mutations that this particular virus can get before you then get it. So if it takes me 3 years to get it, it's probably going to develop a stronger defense against immune systems by the time that I get it. So the sooner I get it, the better, in my opinion. But that's a personal opinion. I'm not saying that that's what everybody needs to do. And especially if you have an immune system that is compromised, I do not recommend that strategy. But for me, I'm a healthy individual. And if I'm going to play my part in preventing the virus spread, that actually means I need to get it and get over it so that I can be part of the herd immunity, right? That's the way that it's supposed to work. But right now, the narrative has completely overthrown what was canon, right? I don't know what like the common wisdom amongst the scientific community was that this is what you had to do. This is what societies needed to do. Those who were most at risk needed to protect themselves. Everyone who was not at risk should get it, either through the best way would be through some sort of a vaccine, because the vaccine would have a diluted form of it that would then still provoke some sort of immunoresponse so that you're not developing the symptoms to their highest extent. You're getting some form of the virus that your body can just kind of get over a little bit easier, right? That's the ideal thing. You don't actually get over the virus. The vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting the virus. It's actually, you're getting a small little broken piece of it that the immune system can develop the antibodies to fight it, so that if you do come in contact with it again, you can fight it. But you get the same exact type of antibodies by actually contracting it and getting over it. Luis Garza says, I have drink by 7 months, and I have not visited doctors nor purchasing medicines, and I have contact with people who have COVID, and my system immunity feels is good, I think, by all the amount I've drank. Yeah, it's vitamin C, right? Like I think that's going into a whole other thing about the nutrition of Americans in general. The diet that we have is not necessarily good. And probably one of the reasons why Americans are one of the highest impacted people in the world by a virus, I think, is because our immune systems are not as strong due to the diet that we have, right? We have a lot of people that have high blood pressure, high cholesterol. A large percentage of us have diabetes. I don't have it, thankfully, but there's people with diabetes or are pre-diabetic, and there's all sorts of different immune system health compromising issues because of our diet. So really the best preventative measure is to eat healthy. And this is that shouldn't come as a shock to anybody, right? That's been the advice of the doctors and the medical society for ages, forever, right? Like that's why we originally had the food pyramid, was really not just for keeping people healthy, right? That was the whole purpose in doing that, was to keep you healthy and also to help prevent the spread of disease. Luis Garza says, sorry, my English is my second idiom. No worries, man. Don't worry. I get what you're saying. Okay, so Van Kerkhove walked back her comment in a news briefing. Now, I love how they phrase this, because if you actually read this, she didn't walk back anything. She clarified. Clarifying is not walking back. So this is, again, one of those things where the sciencenews.org, Science News, which you would think would be scientific and proper news, proper journalism, but here they're injecting their own bias as to what's going on into this statement. Van Kerkhove walked back her comment, which she did no such thing, in a news briefing the following day, saying she had been referring to a small subset of studies that follow people who never show COVID-19 symptoms and their contacts. Quote, we do know that some people who are asymptomatic can transmit the virus on, she said in the June 9th briefing. What we need to better understand is how many people in the population don't have symptoms, and separately, how many of those individuals go on to transmit the virus to others. That's a clarifying statement. That is not walking back anything. Her original statement was, it still appears to be rare. She said it was rare, that an asymptomatic individual actually transmits the virus onwards. She said it was rare. She didn't say it doesn't happen. She said it's rare. There's no scientific evidence that proves that this is happening in large swaths, that this is a major pandemic because of asymptomatic transmission. That just simply, the data does not support that. And again, to go back to this, the whole reason we're being forced to wear masks is because there is this public belief that asymptomatic people are transmitting the virus in large swaths. And there's no scientific evidence to support that. It is rare that there is asymptomatic transmission. That's the statement. She didn't walk this back either. This is what's so infuriating about the news. It's so infuriating. They have a narrative that that large swaths of people are asymptomatic and are transmitting the disease to everyone because they're not wearing masks. That is the public narrative. That is the narrative of the media. That's the narrative of the politicians. And it is infuriating to me because it has absolutely no basis in science whatsoever. None. Nobody is saying that this is the case, except for them who have no scientific data to support that position. And that's what's so aggravating about this to me, is we are having our freedoms. And yes, I understand that, putting on a mask isn't really violating your freedoms, right? It's just an inconvenience. No, there's a lot more going on than that. Businesses are being forced to enforce this in such a way that is killing their business. And people are now being fined on unilateral actions by the executive of the state. The governors themselves are just saying, you know what? We don't have a law to enforce this, so I'm going to make one through executive order. I'm going to become a dictator in charge and say there's a new law, and if you don't, then we're going to fine you, and it's a misdemeanor. That is completely against the American traditions. That's against the Constitution as far as I'm concerned. And I think that they're itching for a fight on this in the constitutional thread, right? This is itching to go to the Supreme Court. It's going to get there because you just can't mandate people to do this. Anyway, okay, I'm getting off on my tangent again. So there's no walking back of, right? This is just a clarifying statement. We do know that some people who are asymptomatic can transmit the virus. What we need to better understand is how many people in the population don't have symptoms. And separately, how many of those individuals go on to transmit the virus to others. That is a clarifying statement that is not walking back the original statement that said that transmission is rare. The WHO statement that asymptomatic transmissions is rare is not backed up by any data, says Anthony Fauci. Really? Where is this data? All the data that I've seen and I've read absolutely backs this up. It is very rare. Where is your data that contradicts this? Do you have this magical data that nobody has seen yet, Dr. Fauci, that says that asymptomatic people are transmitting it in large swaths because nobody has been able to see it? It's just an implication. It's just what the politicians are saying. It's what these medical journals of some sort of rapport have. But again, they don't present the actual evidence. They just state it. And that's the problem, is you can't just have, if a scientist goes out and says, this is the case, but I'm not going to give you any data, you shouldn't believe that scientist just because they have they have a medical degree or something. You can't just, or because they have some sort of degree at all, right? Or they have some previous experience. That is not what you do. A medical profession, or these scientific professions, they have to have actual data supporting their hypothesis and their conclusions, right? Not their hypothesis, but their conclusions. So if a scientist comes out and says, this is the case, and then you ask them for data and they say, well, we don't have any data to support that, or I'm not going to show you the data, or, oh, there just isn't any data, then how can you make that assertion? How can you make that conclusion if there is no data? Are you relying just simply upon your opinion? Okay, if it's your opinion, then state it as your opinion. I'm fine with people having opinions. I have an opinion. Everybody has an opinion. I'm fine with people having an opinion. Just don't tell me your opinion is fact when you don't have data or facts to support your position. It's a glorification of the profession that is creating this allure of a authority that they don't actually have, because the data should be driving the conclusions, not just I have a degree, therefore I am right. I have a degree, therefore my opinion is fact. That is not the case. You have to have scientific data. And Dr. Fauci says is not backed up by any data. The transmissions are rare. That is absolutely not the case. If you look for asymptomatic transmission and you try to find data, not some news article that says this is the case, not some doctor that says this is the case, but actual scientific data that supports this assumption that it is not rare for asymptomatic transmission, or that, especially what I'm curious about, is asymptomatic transmission that is an aerosolized form, that is not through somebody licking their fingers and touching somebody, right? Give me that data that shows that it's not through direct transmission, but it's through aerosolized transmission. Show me that data. Then I will believe you. But there isn't any. Go ahead, try. I would challenge anybody who's watching this video to give me that data, because if you do, I promise you, I will change my opinion on this. I will, because I want to be factually correct. I want my conclusions to be factually correct. And from the data and that I have actually personally looked at and read through, there is no such data that supports Dr. Fauci's position, but there is evidence to support the WHO's position on this. And I'm not a fan of the WHO, don't get me wrong. I think that they're quite often quite wrong about things. But in this case, that's what the evidence actually supports, as far as the evidence that I've actually seen. Okay, I've probably hammered that point home ad nauseum. You guys are probably tired of hearing it. So I think that this, going back to the original purpose of this, and I know I've gone in a pretty large circle around this. Originally I was going to talk about kids, and I think that, again, kids going to school, this is kind of one of the things that I wanted to touch on, was kids going back to school. There's some pretty profound things that I think are being discovered in our politically charged atmosphere right now. Kids for the last couple of decades, I'd say for about the last 20 years especially, have the conservative side, the more conservative parties, the libertarian parties, the Republican parties, the Constitution parties, anybody who's more on the conservative side of things or more of a constitutionalist, have been seeing this trend in the education system towards teachers that are teaching the children things like, a very good example is the founding fathers were all racist, right? A bunch of them had slaves and therefore they were racist, and that means that America's foundation is invalid. It's the 1619 Project is a big one right now. It's obviously 1619 is not a education system, but it is a product of the education system, right? The 1619 Project is a symptom of the education system that exists today. That doesn't mean that America is perfect, or that its foundation was perfect, or that the people who founded it were perfect. There were obviously everybody is a flawed human. Everybody has their flaws. And if your charge that an American society needs to be disbanded because the people who founded it were flawed, I challenge you to find any political system that was not founded by flawed individuals. It's not possible. Every single person is a flawed individual, therefore any form of government that is founded by individuals will be, by definition, a flawed individual that has established it. So the question really is, what are the values that are purported by the system? This is, again, a whole other topic altogether, but it does tie back into the education here in just a moment. But the the fact that we had founding fathers that were flawed does not change the fact that the values that they instilled in and enshrined in the documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are also inherently flawed. There are flaws, I will grant you that, but the values enshrined in them are not flawed. And in fact, the past argument that people like Frederick Douglass and George Washington Carver would have said is that if it weren't for those values being instilled in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, we would not have achieved emancipation of the black man. That was the original default position. And I know, again, I'm touching on a very different topic here. But I understand that there are flaws in the American system. There always will be, always has. And we are continuously trying to achieve a greater state of equality of start, right? Not equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity. That is always worthwhile of pursuing. However, what we are seeing in the education system today is this overwhelming majority, and kids have been polled on this, college graduates have been polled this, it's absolutely, it is breathtaking to see the number of children, kids, college kids, coming out of school, coming out of the high school and the college system, believing that America is one of the greatest evils in the world. That is just amazing that you could have that much. In my opinion, that's brainwashing. Because when you look at the documents and you look at what we were established as, it was the complete opposite. The values are that the individual is sovereign, that the federal government should be limited, and that private rights, the private rights of the citizen are paramount. That is what was enshrined in our documents. And if you have a problem with that, then fine. Go somewhere that doesn't have those things. There are plenty of countries that don't have the ideals and the values of America. Canada is pretty close, but they're definitely not. Mexico's pretty close in a lot of ways, but they're not. They're actually run over by the cartels. But you can go to, good luck getting a citizenship in China, but you can go to, you can go to any European state. You can go to Germany. You can go to France. You can go to England. You can go to Spain. You can go to Italy. You can go to Portugal, right? You can go to any number of European countries that don't have those things enshrined in their documentation, in the documents, the founding documents of their country. But what we have now is an education system that is teaching the kids that America is fundamentally evil because it was established by evil men that were flawed. That is what's happening. So, do I really have a problem with kids not going to school where they are just going to learn more of this? I honestly don't. And that's kind of one of the things that is holding me back from saying we absolutely need to send kids back to school. I understand that for a lot of adults, a lot of parents, they have to go to work, and the education system was a de facto babysitter. It was a way for them to be able to go to work and not have to worry about, not have to worry about their kids. The kids were taken care of by teachers and staff and faculty. And that can still occur if you essentially return all of the money that we pay in taxes to the parents and to everybody for that matter. If you return all of the money that is paid out to the public education system and put it back in the pockets of the parents, they'd find a way to continue to educate their kids and have them babysat while they go to work. Our education system has taken money out of the pockets of individuals and taxpayers for a very, very long time. If you are going to not allow kids to go back to school, de facto babysitters, then you need to reimburse everybody the money that they paid in taxes for those schools. And I'm talking sales taxes. I'm talking income taxes. I'm talking whatever the tax is that has been gas taxes, right? Any tax that is supposed to go to the public education system, those need to be, since kids are no longer going to school, you need to repay the taxpayers that money so that they can do something with their kids, since they're not going to be in the education system. And honestly, I would be fine with that. I think the majority of conservatives would be fine with that. I think that that's exactly what we should do. And I am fine with a privatized education system that becomes the de facto babysitters, because then the parents get the choice of which private company, private school that we send our kids to. I'm fine with that. But what I have a problem with is continuing to send, or having this debate, not sending our kids going to public school, to still have our taxes withdrawn for those public schools that are not actually teaching our kids. And what they do teach our kids is fundamentally that America is evil. And oh, by the way, which the majority of the population of America, as we all know, is predominantly European or Anglo-Saxon, white, Caucasian, right? So they're learning in school that white Caucasian people are evil and that we founded the country that they are now living in. That's what you're sending your kids to learn. That's, or at least part of what they're learning. They're learning that along with, reading, writing, arithmetic to a certain extent. But I'd be fine with us defunding schools, giving that money back to the parents so that they can decide where that money goes and which schools, which private schools that they go to, and figuring out for their own kids exactly what to do with their kids. I'd be happy with that. I think that giving personal responsibility back to the parents is something that we should fundamentally go back to. So having kids not go back to school is not a big problem for me. I just want to make sure that the money goes back in the pockets of the taxpayers so that they can pay for their kids to go to whatever school or have whatever kind of education that the parents want. And we get out of this public system that is, basically indoctrinating our kids to hate the very people that we are and the very country that we live in and the very freedoms that we love. That's what they're learning to hate. And we see that now. We've seen it on college campuses for about the last 10 years. There's been a major influx of that in the last 10 to 5 years. We've seen now it's grown. Now those kids are no longer in college. So where do they go? Well, they go to the streets and they start to riot. They start to loot and they start to chant the same slogans that they learned in college out on the streets. And they call for all these things. And that's why we're in the situation we're in today. So I don't have a problem with kids not going back to school. I think that that's perfectly fine. Just give us our money back, right? Give us our money back. That's kind of my position on that. So, lots of roundabout good discussion today. This has been a long video, and I kind of want to cap it off with this statement. I talked about kids and COVID-19, and I definitely want to tackle the idea of Black Lives Matter in a future video. Look, everyone is precious. Every single life is precious. Every death from COVID is a tragedy. Every person who has been impacted by this is, I feel for you. I really do. I've been one of the lucky few who has not been as impacted. My job security is so far pretty solid. I don't know, maybe if somebody from my company watches this, gets a burr up their butt about it, maybe they might report me and I lose my job. I don't know. That's entirely possible in today's society. And that is a fear that I have, but also at the same time, I think that it's important to have these discussions and talk about these things. But every life is precious to me. And I believe wholeheartly in love thy neighbor, as I love Jesus. And I'm not afraid to say that I am a Christian, and I'm a God-fearing Christian who loves and believes in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I'm unabashed in saying that. I don't always say that, but what that does, and the reason why I'm telling you that is because I want you to understand that I love everybody. I really do. Regardless of background, culture, creed, whatever, I still love you. And I hope that you guys all, I hope that you guys stay safe. If you are immunocompromised, I hope that you are taking every precaution imaginable in order to make sure that you are safe. I would hate to see you become one of the statistics. At the same time, I worry and I fear what is happening to our American system, our American set of values, our American principles, when we see intrusion after intrusion by state legislatures, by governors, doing it through executive order, and through Congress, and just the vile things that are being taught to our kids in colleges and high schools. The degradation of the American society and the American values and principles, as I said, that were enshrined in our documents. I fear greatly that America is on a tremendous decline. We have overextended ourselves in debt. We are continuing a downward trend financially and fiscally. Uh, we are seeing the emergence of the Chinese government and the Chinese people, which I have no problem with. Like, I love China as a culture. I don't particularly like their government, but I love the culture. But we are seeing that they are rebounding from the coronavirus much faster and much better than we are. And they're going to probably surpass us economically very, very shortly. We could very well see the Chinese economy eclipse the American economy in short order here, especially as the coronavirus continues to sweep through America and the Democratic Party essentially implode America. They're just causing an implosion of America, the American economy, and then they're turning around and blaming Donald Trump for it, which is just the most asinine thing. You're shutting down your own local economies and then blaming Donald Trump for it. It's just the epitome of hubris. I cannot believe that they get away with it too because of the news media, because the media is so frothing at the mouth to blame Republicans and Donald Trump for every single ail in America, that any small thing that happens is Donald Trump's fault. And it's a sad thing to see, and I think that America is devolving into chaos right before our eyes. I liken it very much to, if anybody's ever watched the old Looney Tunes cartoons, where Wile E. Coyote is chasing after the Roadrunner, and then he runs over a cliff, and the coyote continues to run well beyond the cliff, but hasn't yet started to fall, and that's because his inertia supposedly has carried him over without starting to fall, right? And I think that that's where America is right now. I think that our inertia has carried us over the edge, and we have not yet seen that the bottom has been removed from us, and we're about to make a giant crash. That is my biggest concern. So for all of you out there who I love, please stay safe in these very troubling times. Stay safe from COVID. Please make sure you are prepared and stocked up for any eventuality that may come from what I perceive as the tyranny that is coming our way, and the rebellion that I think is really starting to form and take shape. And we see it on the city streets pretty much every day, and the news media, unfortunately, is banging that drum right along with them and cheering it on. We're seeing the cheering on of the destruction of America's values and principles, and it is a sad, sad thing that I was hoping I would never see in my lifetime, but unfortunately, I think we're experiencing it right now. So that's unfortunately a sour note for me to end on, but I think it's truth, and I had to speak from my heart. That's what I believe that we see. And again, this has nothing to do with my race or the race of anybody else. This has nothing to do with my my sexual orientation or any of that crap, or whatever intersectionality of class of people that you want to put me or anybody else at. It has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. I'm not fearful because my way of life is in danger. My privileged white life is in danger. That is a bunch of malarkey, and I'm pissed off that people are even saying that about anybody else. You don't know what type of trials I have had to go through in order to become who I am. You don't know what type of racism that I had to face throughout my life. You have no idea what kind of sexism I had to face throughout my life. You don't know what type of trials and tribulations I have had to overcome. So that is a bunch of malarkey, and I don't believe that anybody else has any more claim to more privilege or less privilege than I do. Does everybody start from an equal starting position in their life? Absolutely not. I know that some people have it way better than others when they start, and I would love to see, and I continue to seek out a way to equalize how people start, but I do not want to see equal ends. I want to see equal means, but not equal ends. And I think that should be a value. I think it was a value of American society, right? We have equal opportunity, not equal outcome. That's been a pretty large tenet of America for a very long time, and I'd like to see us return to that. Unfortunately, I think the converse is what's being prevalent and being made the primary belief system by our education system right now, and that's why I have no qualms with kids being pulled out of school. because I don't want them indoctrinated into this belief that America is inherently evil, because it's not perfectly equal in terms of outcome. We've seen the greatest tyranny occur because people wanted equal outcome. And I fear that that is where America's heading, and unfortunately, I don't see anything that's going to stop it. I just don't see anything that's going to stop it. All right. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of comments you guys would like to make, and please feel free to drop me the comments in this video. I hope, again, everybody stays safe, and I love you all. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, despite this sour note and despite this sour video. I hope you guys do have a good weekend, and